Hi, my name is Sydney Snyder. I am an art teacher in Los Angeles, California at an inclusive model school. Inclusive model means that our students of all physical and intellectual abilities work side by side all day with no pullouts or special day classes. Because of that, something that's really important to me is accessibility in the art room. So I put together a little resource for you. It's a PDF that has a lot of clickable links on accessibility in the Tab Studio. And I just wanted to go over it with you really quickly. And then potentially maybe I can answer some questions about it during my Q&A on my other presentation called Queer Visibility in the Elementary and Middle School Art Classroom. I'm going to let you go through most of it on your own to keep this short, but I'm just going to scroll through it and see if there's maybe some things I want to clarify. Okay, so this is a resource. The other art teacher I work with at my school, her name is Emily Morton, and I put together at the beginning of the pandemic, and we put together a resource for parents supporting their kids at home with art making. I've taken some of that resource and then added a bunch of new stuff to create this resource for you that I hope will help when you're back on campus if you're not already with your students, or could potentially help parents who are at home supporting their kiddos in your art class right now. So increased access in the Tab Studio. We have broken it down by centers. So there are tips in here for the Drawing Center, Painting Center, Collage and Sculpture, and then digital media. And then I also have some examples of a student's WOW process. And then I also have some universal access tips. So here we have suggestions for grips and adaptive supplies. Our favorite is actually just the tempera paint sticks because they require very little pressure to make a lot, to lay down a lot of color, which works for students with motor challenges. And then there's a lot of things you can create using things that are just already in your classroom, grips and adaptive materials that will be free or very low cost. PVC pipes are great for a lot of students. It creates like a T-grip, you can add a strap to that so it could actually be strapped to a student's hand. I'm later going to suggest that you collaborate with, if you have an occupational therapist on campus or a physical therapist, if you have SPED teachers, collaboration can help you figure out what works best for each student a lot faster than if you're just experimenting and doing trial and error on your own. I also want to just say with a drawing center, and I think this is probably true for all of you anyway, since you're all tab teachers, but just having an expectation that students like experiment and play around with mark making or whatever kind of drawing, abstract, whatever it works for them. Something that's not super accessible is having like an expectation for a representational drawing from all of your students, like doing even like a self-portrait. If I were to do like a self-portrait project, I would probably have an option for photography or collage or video, even making a collage on Google Slides or Canva that has like an about me collage, just so that it's not like everyone has to do this fine motor heavy, like draw an eye and eyelashes thing. So just having students experiment and making that like a norm in your classroom if it's not already. And then very occasionally I'll provide like a coloring page if I have a student who really wants to work on something representational and can't create a drawing themselves. You can also provide stamps. Painting Center, I think, has a lot of accessibility options just built in because paint, like those paint sticks, is really easy to lay down a lot of color. There are various grips I have on here. The Easy Hold is a pretty cool grip that actually can hold a supply and attach it to a student's hand. And one of my students has also recently started experimenting with something called a functional hand. And this can hold bigger supplies. And so for this student, they can hold the functional hand, they can grip that. The Easy Hold can hold it to their hand, and then the functional hand can hold the paintbrush. And this made painting a lot more accessible to this student than the Easy Hold on its own. If you're doing resist, having crayons that are like the egg shaped, or you could make your own in like a cupcake mold that are easier to grip, and then having various texture rollers and stuff. We also are, a lot of our students really love those bingo daubers, and they can add a lot of color, and it's kind of like a nice repetitive thing. And I work with students of all abilities. So I have students on the spectrum, I have students with Down syndrome, I have students who have cerebral palsy. And so when I'm talking about accessibility, I'm referring to those students, but it's also you just have students who like accessing supplies in different ways. And that's one of the things that's beautiful about TAB is students have the freedom to figure out how they like to use supplies. So these are really universal tips, a lot of these. At the Collage Center, it can be really cool to have pre-cut stuff like, and this works for your 4-year-old students who aren't using scissors yet, or students who maybe it's more important that you have them making aesthetic choices and composition choices and color choices rather than taking, 10 minutes to cut out a circle, just having pre-cut shapes available and then having stuff with different textures can be really fun too, because then it might be more stimulating and fun to create. I also have linked a bunch of different adaptive scissors here. You can experiment with different scissors with different students. The one thing I will say is that these battery operated scissors can be switch adapted with a like a power interrupter thing. You might have someone on campus who knows what I'm talking about that could help you, but these break really easily. So I like to make all of my adaptive tools available to all my students except for these because these break just so frequently. But the reason you make these adaptive supplies available to all students is so that your students who need adaptive supplies aren't othered when you go, hey, here's your special scissors. No, everyone else, you use this one kind, you get this special pair. So just having a variety of tools available for everyone. Digital art. So these apps, some of these work as like a digital art center. Like I have iPads available that students can do drawings on and make video art and do photography. So some of these are good for that, but they also are good for things like creating artist statements, which I'll talk more about later. Canva has been a great tool during distance learning. It's something I think we'll use even when we're back in the classroom. If you haven't heard of Canva, definitely check it out. Educators can get a free professional account, and then your students can get free professional accounts under your account. And one thing, if you have students who use whiteboards to make choices, A, B, C, D, like if there's an adult that holds up a whiteboard, like which choice do you want? You can do that right in Canva. So you can take images if you figure out the student wants a picture of a dog and put some different dogs in there. I actually like to usually do something else under D so that if they don't like the first 3 options, you can try some more. The nice thing on Canva is if you make a little grid on one of the pages and the student makes their choice, you can just drag it up to the other page. So you can explore the rest of those on your own. I also wanted to include some switch adapted tools. So if you have switch users, you know what I'm talking about, but there might be a switch here that a student uses for, or here, or with the head that a student uses to access like a communication device or like the scissors I was talking about. I have this spin art, switch adapted spin art in my classroom that all of my students love using, not just my switch users. And then I also have this bubble machine, and I use that a lot at summer camp just because the students like doing bubbles period. But you can also put like food coloring or liquid watercolor in there with the bubbles and put paper up and see what happens. Try some bubble printing with that. These are all switch adapted tools that I have not tried but want to. This first one's a camera. I tried to switch adapt an iPad like the entire year last year. That was like my big goal. And I worked with our tech department and I worked with our speech therapist who just is familiar with the iPad accessibility tools. And we couldn't figure it out. So this could be a cool option if you do a lot of photography. This I thought would be so fun for the Architecture and Design Center. It's like they can put together these gears and it's like a moving structure. But in the end, it has like a switch that can be accessed with little buttons, or a student can access it with their switch. So you could have one student that's making the whole thing go at the end. There's a water gun on here, which I'm getting for summer camp this summer. I'm so excited. We do a lot of painting with water guns. So I'll put up a big drop cloth and then students will squirt it with a water gun. So this one, a student can access a lot more independently using a switch, and you could mount it to something or have someone hold it with them. This is a Crayola drawing thing. I linked to the original one here, the non-switch adapted one, because I think on its own, it could be an adaptive supply for a lot of students and just fun for all your students, because there's like a little thing that you turn. So rather than holding a marker and creating a drawing, they would just turn a little thing. This one is really expensive because a company took the Crayola one, you can see Crayola right there, and made it battery operated mechanical one so that it could be hooked up to a switch. Let me know if you try any of those. They're really cool. A lot of the stuff's really expensive, but like you buy it once and then use it forever, hopefully. I also have some universal access tips on here. Like I said, working together with service providers in your school is like probably the number one tip I can give you if you're lucky enough to have those resources. Um, for our inclusive model school to work, it takes a lot of collaboration, and you might have IEP goals that can be met in your classroom, or even like adaptive PE stuff that can be met in your classroom because there's so much that happens in an art classroom that involves movement and expression. Plan for communication differences by providing like word banks or prompts ahead of time, creating universally accessible or more universally accessible worksheets, like with multiple choice instead of short answer. I like to think, okay, is it really necessary for my students to write out a sentence to accomplish this task in the art room? Or can I give everyone a multiple choice and then it's accessible to all of my students and everyone has the same worksheet? I don't have to give one student like their own special, modified worksheet. We also like to provide multiple format options for our artist statements. I'll tell you more about that in a second. You also want to be aware of sensory processing differences. So it can be a lot to have, I clearly like putting stuff on the walls, but in my classroom, I try to limit it to the necessary stuff. Like I have Elements of Principles posters, I have Studio Habits of Mind posters, and then I have a wall where students display stuff. And then I have signs up at centers. So it's a lot, but I try and keep it to a minimum. I try not to hang a lot of stuff from the ceiling because that can be really distracting for some students. And then also planning for fine motor differences, just having a variety of adaptive tools available at each of your centers that are available to all students. Okay. And then the last thing I want to include is one of my students' WOW process. This is a student who is on the spectrum and he uses an iPad for a lot of his communication, like uses a communication device. So he is not a Switch user. And he does have some motor difficulty, and he often has direct support at school and is now receiving that at home from a parent. So this is the planning sheet that all of our students use to plan their WOW work in middle school and then eventually in elementary school, something like this. We adapted a worksheet that's originally by Katie Mathis that looks very similar to this. We just changed some things to make it more accessible to all of our students. For these worksheets, we have them on a Google Slides version and a Canva version so that they have image banks available within the app and they can just select images to put in there. This student, I believe, used his communication device to come up with sentences that the parent then copied over to Canva. And so these are his words. And then he also chose pictures to include to represent the supplies he's using and the ideas. A student could use pictures for these last two questions also, or they can use words. You might have a student who dictates something and someone writes it down for them. You might have a student who does like speech to text. You also might have a student who needs like the whiteboard with choices or a list to choose from. You don't want to like say here's the project you're doing, but just having kind of keywords and stuff like for centers, like which center do you want to use? Okay, at that center, what supplies do you want to use? What do you want to make your work about? Might be helpful for some students. And then the creating step of this same project that you can see the planning sheet for, you can see here. So the parent created these stencils. For a previous piece, the student had painted inside of a stencil that his parent made, and that gave him the idea to try painting outside after we talked about negative and positive space, paint outside of the stencil. And this student is making art about two things that are really important to him, which are technology and music, because this student uses, and you'll see this in this artist statement, uses technology to communicate and to access school. And then music is it's a calming tool for this student. So he always has like a iPhone with music playing. This piece tells us a lot about the student, teaches us a lot about the student. And then the stencils helped him get those images in there that he wanted without having to draw or paint a music note. And then the reflecting step, like I said, we like to have different formats for our students. And so this student, Canva really works well for him. So he, came up with these phrases. He came up with these aesthetic choices. So having the phone with Spotify on it and having the actual piece of artwork on an iPad, which is cool. And then here you can read some statements about his work. We provided this rubric to all of our students to help them come up with their wow work. This is very similar to the one that we give them in school, and they can handwrite something, they can type something, they can do the speech to text, they can dictate, they can make an audio recording, they can make a video recording, they can make an infographic like this one, or they can come up with their own idea. I've had a student make a really cool TikTok artist statement before that like blew my mind because I've never seen another TikTok video in my life. So I don't know, it was very cool to me. And then this has in bold, like the big things that they need to include, and then examples of each thing. We also input this on Google Classroom because that's where they're turning in their work, and they can go through the rubric right in the assignment as they're doing it. This is a JPEG, but it's clickable. And if you click it, it'll take you to a view-only version of this Google Doc. And you can make a copy of it and modify it if you think this is something that would work well for your students. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I tried to go as fast as possible to keep this short. And hopefully if you have questions, I can answer those during my Q&A, even though it's mostly about the other presentation. You can also find me on Instagram at Sydney Teaching Art. And you can email me at sydneyteachingart@gmail.com. And I'll do my best to get back to you, but pandemic teaching. Okay, hope that was helpful. Hope you're enjoying the conference. Bye.